Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today I will analyze the case of Clayton Weatherston. First, I will look at the background of this case, move to the timeline of the crime, then offer my analysis. Clayton Robert Weatherston was born on January 9, 1976, in Dunedin, New Zealand. His father, Roger, was a self-employed industrial electrician. His mother, Euleen, was a switchboard operator. Clayton had two older siblings, Angela and Gareth. In 1998, Clayton was treated for anxiety. For much of his life, he struggled with accepting change, like going to school or moving away from home. Despite this, he always performed well academically. In 2000, Clayton graduated from college with a bachelor's degree in commerce. He started working toward a PhD at the University of Otago. In October 2005, Clayton purchased a home for $200,000. He lived there alone. To pay his bills, he had a scholarship and he worked as an economics tutor at the college. In June 2007, he met a student named Sophie Kate Elliott, who was 9 years younger than him. The couple became romantically involved. The relationship was tumultuous and described as on-again, off-again. On December 15, 2007, Clayton earned his PhD. By this point, Sophie was no longer interested in being romantically involved with Clayton and ended their relationship. She had plans to move to Wellington to take a job at the New Zealand Treasury. On December 27, just 12 days after Clayton earned his PhD, he and Sophie had an argument which became physical. Sophie wrote in her diary that Clayton attacked her and said he wished she was dead. He also said that she was a blanking, horrible person, everyone hated her, she was blanking ugly, and he had never liked her. He made these statements while pinning her down on a bed with his forearm across her throat and his hand over her mouth. Sophie said that she was scared and panicked. She knew that Clayton was furious and extremely unreasonable. Now moving to the timeline of the crime. On Wednesday, January 9, 2008, Sophie was at her family house in the suburb of Ravensbourne. She was packing in preparation for her move to Wellington, which was to take place the next day. At about 12:30 p.m., Clayton showed up at the house unannounced. Sophie's mother, Leslie, answered the door. Clayton explained that he was there to offer a parting gift to Sophie. Leslie let him in, and he went into Sophie's bedroom. Sophie came downstairs and told her mother, "He's just sitting there, not saying anything." Right after Sophie returned to her bedroom, Leslie heard her scream something like, "Stop it, Clayton," or "Don't, Clayton." In addition to the screaming, Leslie heard thumping sounds coming from the bedroom. She went upstairs, only to discover the bedroom door was locked. Leslie went back downstairs, retrieved a kitchen utensil and her cell phone, and went back to Sophie's bedroom. She managed to unlock the door with the kitchen utensil. It was a meat skewer. Inside the room, Leslie saw that Sophie was on the floor and Clayton was kneeling over her. He was stabbing Sophie with his right hand and pushed the door closed with his left. Leslie called emergency services. The first police officer who arrived approached Sophie's bedroom door, which was locked. The officer indicated that the door needed to be opened, or he would kick it in. When Clayton unlocked the door, the officer opened it and saw Sophie dead on the floor, covered in blood. The officer asked, "What have you done?" Clayton responded, "I killed her." When the officer asked why, Clayton said, "The emotional pain she has caused me over the past year." Clayton was arrested and charged with murder. An autopsy revealed that Sophie had been stabbed and cut 216 times. Her wounds were created by a knife and a pair of scissors. She also sustained blunt force injuries. In June 2009, Clayton went to trial. His defense argued that he was not guilty of murder. Rather, Clayton was guilty of manslaughter because Sophie provoked him. On July 22, 2009, Clayton was found guilty of murder. On September 15 of that same year, he was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 18 years. Based on the parole statistics in New Zealand, it's likely that Clayton will serve at least 20 years. Now moving to my analysis. Here are my thoughts on a few areas that stood out to me in this case. Item number 1. Clayton testified in his own defense, but his testimony did not help him at all. He indicated that when he was young, he was an excellent student whose abilities far outclassed his fellow students. He was a big fish in a small pond. At the age of 6, Clayton was reading at the level of a 12 to 14-year-old and drinking black coffee. I found this coffee reference to be curious. How did that demonstrate academic superiority? Is the age at which somebody first drinks coffee associated with intelligence? Like, the younger the better? I imagine 2 elementary school teachers talking in a hallway between classes. One says, "Have you seen little Johnny's test scores? They are better than all his classmates. What's more, I heard he started drinking coffee at the age of 4. The other teacher responds, "I wasn't convinced by his test scores, but drinking coffee at 4, well, there is no doubt that Johnny is a genius." Despite Clayton's unparalleled academic success, he had his share of struggles. He repeatedly wet the bed when he was younger, and he had to get eyeglasses at the age of 11. The acquisition of eyeglasses occurred after an embarrassing incident where Clayton could not read the blackboard during a math test. He only answered 14 of 20 questions correctly as a result. This was a devastating failure compared to his usual superior performance. Clayton hated wearing eyeglasses. He was embarrassed by them because he did not believe they were fashionable. Over the years, he continued to focus on getting perfect grades. He had once received an A on a paper instead of an A+ as usual, and believed it was a horrible stain on his academic record. During Clayton's testimony, he had to be interrupted several times because he talked excessively about his own remarkable accomplishments. Item number 2, Clayton had a history of anxiety and narcissism. Mental health clinicians for the defense diagnosed Clayton with narcissistic personality disorder, or NPD. This disorder features 9 criteria. At least 5 must be endorsed for a diagnosis. Here are the criteria: grandiosity, preoccupation with grandiose fantasies, believing oneself to be special or of high status, requiring excessive admiration, a sense of entitlement, manipulating others, lacking empathy, being envious, and arrogance. It is unusual for NPD to be introduced or emphasized by the defense in a murder case. Usually, personality disorders are sidestepped or minimized in defense strategies because they do not elicit sympathy from a jury. Juries do not often view personality disorders as true mental disorders. Rather, they tend to look at the negative personality characteristics as a choice. This distinction is not reasonable, but it is the reality of how juries think about these cases. For example, if a defendant has a disorder like major depressive disorder, obsessive-compulsive disorder, or schizophrenia, a jury may look at that person's bad behavior and believe that it is partially explained by the disorder. The defendant did not choose to be mentally ill, and their judgment was compromised by the illness. When looking at a defendant who has a personality disorder like antisocial, narcissistic, or borderline, juries are more skeptical. They view the defendant as being evil, malicious, and acting deliberately. The destructive personality characteristics were not imposed on the individual, rather, they were selected by the individual. The person chooses to have the illness. Or perhaps the negative traits are simply worse versions of normal traits and do not indicate psychopathology. Either way, the jury would not be inclined to view the defendant as less culpable. In the case of Clayton Weatherston, the defense took a chance and argued that his diagnosis of NPD explained his behavior. His attorneys claimed that it made him vulnerable to provocation. This gamble did not pay off, but the defense may not have had any choice. They were forced to work with what was available as far as a diagnosis. Item number 3, with all this in mind, was Clayton guilty of murder? Let's take a look at the evidence both for and against the idea he was guilty, starting with the inculpatory factors. According to a former lover, Clayton was insecure, nasty, and easily angered. She claimed that during an argument in 2006, he kicked her and jumped on her back and shoulders. Clayton admitted to stabbing and cutting Sophie 216 times with a kitchen knife and a pair of scissors. This is excessive regardless of whether he was provoked by Sophie. She only weighed 121 pounds compared to his 185 pounds. Clayton brought the kitchen knife with him to her residence. His defense argued that Clayton routinely carried a kitchen knife for self-defense, but that is very hard to believe. Not long before the killing, Sophie had ended her romantic relationship with Clayton. On the day he stabbed her, Sophie was packing to move to another city. This city was on another island. It is difficult to believe that this was a coincidence. More likely, Clayton was angry about losing Sophie. Even though Clayton claimed that Sophie attacked him with a pair of scissors, he never really argued that his actions were self-defense. Rather, he just focused on her alleged provocation. Again, his attorneys conceded that Clayton was guilty of manslaughter. Now moving to the exculpatory factors, Clayton's attorneys argued that if he planned the murder, he would have taken a higher quality knife, not a kitchen knife, rather one that was more durable. Clayton claimed that Sophie attacked him with a pair of scissors because she was upset after he suggested that she should be tested for sexually transmitted diseases. During this attack, Clayton's eyeglasses were knocked off his face. This put him in a vulnerable position because he could barely see without them. In this state, he lost the ability to control himself. When considering all the evidence in this case, do I believe that Clayton was guilty of murder? Yes, he was guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. In my opinion, he went to Sophie's home with the intent of murdering her unless she gave in to his demands, like agreeing to a reconciliation. He may have planned on killing her either way. What do I think happened in this case? This is just a theory, my opinion. Clayton Weatherston was self-centered, impulsive, angry, volatile, aggressive, violent, cold, callous, sadistic, vindictive, petty, vulnerable, insecure, manipulative, deceptive, antagonistic, socially awkward, grandiose, arrogant, condescending, pretentious, haughty, competitive, jealous, motivated to succeed, anxious, perfectionistic, controlling, demanding, falsely believed he was special, had a sense of entitlement, and was exceedingly creepy. He was obsessed about his lover Sophie and wanted reassurance that he was a superior boyfriend. For example, Clayton would question her about the size of his genitals compared to her other lovers from the past. His idea of pillow talk was less, "I love you," and more, "Tell me again about how I am bigger than Steve." At this rate, Sophie probably needed a ruler and a bar graph just to make it through dinner. When Sophie rejected Clayton, he could not tolerate this insult. His vindictiveness contributed to his decision to kill her. From his point of view, the homicide represented justice for all Sophie had done to him. He was a grievance collector. He believed that this was the only way to settle the score. Clayton knew that the overkill he demonstrated during the attack meant that any self-defense claim would be rejected, so he decided to pursue a provocation defense. Perhaps he believed this would be more acceptable to the jury, because he was accepting some responsibility. Again, he was admitting that he committed manslaughter, which is a serious offense involving prison time. Part of Clayton's story involved Sophie knocking his eyeglasses off his face. Even after all these years, Clayton simply could not let it go with those eyeglasses. His life was forever changed at the age of 11 when he was forced to get them. Therefore, he found a way to work them into his story as a vulnerability. Ultimately, not only was Clayton found guilty, the law in New Zealand was changed to prevent provocation from being used as a partial defense to murder. People were so angry that Clayton even tried to use provocation to explain his behavior. They decided to solve a problem that didn't exist. They eliminated a reasonable defense, which has been recognized for hundreds of years. The effects of this knee-jerk reaction will probably stay in place until someone makes a habit of provoking people into attacking them. Then people will say, "Why did we eliminate that defense?" Now moving to my final thoughts. This case highlights the controversy surrounding narcissistic personality disorder. NPD has long been criticized as a less than useful or even invalid clinical conceptualization. There are many concerns with NPD, including the fact that it captures grandiose narcissism rather than vulnerable narcissism. Arguably, vulnerable narcissism is much more insidious and hazardous. That's the type of narcissism that better explains Clayton's criminal behavior. He was certainly grandiose, but it was the vulnerable traits that made him dangerous. Some people worry that NPD will be effectively invoked as a defense in criminal cases, but as Clayton's situation illustrates, focusing on NPD is not a successful defense strategy. Some of the traits, like arrogance and the false belief of being special, are so offensive, juries become overwhelmed with feelings of disgust and do not hesitate to convict. Those are my thoughts in the case of Clayton Weatherston. Thank you so much for watching. I'll talk to you soon.